Hello, it's Iain MacCormick here. The 70s were vitally important so far as I and the SNP were concerned. The first election in the 1970s was in 1970 itself, in June. We all thought in Argyll and the SNP at that stage that we were bound to win. We really did. We were convinced we were going to win. The campaign went extremely well. However, at the count, where we still thought we were going to win, as the votes piled up, it became apparent that we were coming second. We came second to Michael Doble and the Conservatives at that June 1970 election when Ted Heath became Prime Minister. In the period following that, life continued much as before. We continued with our little newspaper, the Highland Nationalist. We continued to hold branch meetings and constituency meetings and an annual conference in Argyll, and took part fully in the national affairs of the SNP as well. And then, of course, we came up to February 1974, where again we were able to use the same team and ran a really terrific campaign against a new candidate from the Conservative side, whose name was Peter Hutchison. On that occasion, it became apparent quite swiftly, really, that we were very likely to win, because the existing MP was retiring. There was no Liberal standing at all. And right enough, when the count came along in Dunoon, where the votes were counted in those days, we won by a reasonable majority. So that was that. That was 7 of us elected in one fell swoop to Parliament in London. I used to say at these meetings, before we had actually won the election, that the Unionist politicians were Scotsmen until they got off the train at Euston, but by the time they'd walked down Whitehall, they became so British that it wasn't true. Westminster's a very beguiling place in many respects. I had the great good fortune to attend Glasgow University. One of my main things at Glasgow University was the debating. Debating in Glasgow University is still, as far as I know, run on parliamentary lines in a hall which is made to look rather like the House of Commons itself. And at the time when I was up at university, Donald Dewar was there, Teddy Taylor was there, John Smith was there, Bing Campbell was there at the same time. So that taking one seat for the first time in the House of Commons wasn't so overwhelming as it might otherwise have been. There was another election in 1974 in October. We increased our majority in Argyll, and a further 4 members were elected from the SNP. So we had a football team by that stage of 11, including 2 ladies. At that time, in Parliament, it was utterly different from what is the situation there today. For one thing, at no stage from the February election till after the October election did the government have a real working majority. Now, the obvious fallout from that was that even small parties like ours had a tremendous influence over affairs, and people had to listen to what we had to say, and they were very keen that we would support one or the other of the 2 major parties. It was exciting from that point of view. And it was all done at a time when MPs were in a totally different position than today. We were paid very little. In fact, I was paid, I think, slightly more as a schoolmaster in Argyll than I was as an MP. And there was no question of falsifying expenses and so on, because there were very few expenses at all. So it was a different world. And it was also a world where almost all MPs had a previous career totally outside politics. I actually managed to pass a private member's bill. I don't think a Scottish nationalist will ever do so again, and certainly none had ever done so before. It was a divorce bill for Scotland, the first modernising, if you like, of the divorce law in Scotland. So that takes us up to the winter of discontent, and Jim Callaghan, who made the same blunder as Gordon Brown did. Hesitant about when to call the election, I was in Islay when I heard on television Callaghan actually announcing I'd decided there's not going to be an election. That was in October 1978. I think the SNP would have done well in October 1978, but by the time it came round to when the election really did take place in 79, the chance had been lost. I knew from opinion polls, I knew from just the feelings of the people going around the place that the SNP were not going to do well. I thought we could pull through in Argyll, and we nearly did actually, but only 2 people survived the election. In the 80s, well, the 80s was very interesting from my point of view. From the party's point of view, it was another seminal period, really. I will enjoy telling you about that.